All right, today we're going to be talking about all of the planets in the 8th house in astrology, giving you the full meaning explained. First, we're going to be going through the physical manifestations of the 8th house and how they're affected by each planet, then the psychological manifestations and how they're affected by each planet, and their archetypes that are listed down here on the left. And then when we're talking about the physical and the psychological manifestations of the 8th planet, we're going to be going through the light manifestations, creative, positive manifestations, and the destructive, negative, shadow manifestations, okay? Said manifestation a lot of times in that, that introduction. All right, so as you've seen in the first 7 videos, now that we're on the 8th house, kind of getting the hang of it, right? This is a series, so if you haven't seen those videos, check those out before. And, you take the general archetypes, right? These are not exhaustive. There are near infinite archetypes for each different planet, but these are the overarching major ones that I could think of at the time. And so we first always start off with the sun and we put it in the 8th house. So we're taking these archetypes, the king, the father, the leader, the masculine, and we're putting it into the 8th house. So when it comes to a physical manifestation, what does the 8th house represent? Well, unexpected events or crisis, sexual, deep intimacy, and also trauma or traumatic events. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the 8th house is the most difficult house. It is the most painful house. It is the Dhisthana. In Vedic astrology, the 6th, 8th, and 12th are Dhisthana houses, are difficult places. All they mean is that when you have, or things involving those houses are more difficult. Each house is a different area of life, right? The Angel houses are power houses. The Succeedant houses are security houses. This is also a Succeedant house as well, moksha, liberation. But the 8th house in particular is the most severe Dhisthana, difficult place, because it focuses on your deepest fears, deepest traumas, the parts of yourself, the shadow itself, right? These are things that the 8th house represents. But we're going to be focusing on unexpected events, crisis, trauma or deep fears, and sexual intimacy, okay? From a physical standpoint. So you take the sun, the king, the father, the leader, you put it in the 8th. And so wherever the sun goes, one thing that you need to always understand in every one of these videos that I'm going through, all the houses, is that the sun is your destiny. And it's also your archetypal makeup. So your sun sign, the house that the sun's in, that is going to have a strong focus on your destiny and the sacrifices you're going to make in that area of your life, depending on the house, to fulfill your destiny, whatever that may be. Usually that's signified by wherever Leo is. Okay, so and in this scenario, if we're using the example where you're in Aries rising, your destiny would involve creativity, creative intelligence, children, and accessing your natural state of being, things like that. But that they would be operating through the 8th house, which is your destiny, because the sun's there. So your destiny involves what, right? Crisis, transformation, and sexual, deep intimacy, bonds with other people. This can be difficult, obviously. I mean, the sun is a powerful planet. It's the most powerful planet. So having the sun here isn't the most difficult, just inherently, obviously, if it's afflicted, or we're going to get into that shadow manifestations later on. But the sun here, in and of itself, is not the most difficult, the most challenging, the most painful, another way of putting it, because the 8th house can be very painful when you have lots of pieces of your consciousness here. But through transformation, through unexpected events, things you could have never planned for, through traumatic experiences, or through working through and processing your past trauma and connecting deeply with other people, especially in sexual bonds, you fulfill your destiny, or you move towards your destiny, whatever that may be. Also, the sun is your core identity. And so the unexpected events, the trauma, the sexual bonds you have with other people are imperative and a large part of your core identity, more so than the average person, right? Because obviously, everyone's identity is going to incorporate those things to a certain degree, right? It's part of our lives, and those things are also very intense and noticeable and poignant. They take up a lot of space in our consciousness because they are so visceral in the experiences that they produce. But when the sun's here, they are central, they are core to your identity. They are being channeled from your higher self, which is another thing that the sun can represent. It also means that during crisis, during these unexpected events, during sexual intimacy, you are meant to, when the sun's healthy, to take the lead, to have a strong, consistent framework and a consistent identity. not allowing the crisis to upend you and disrupt your core identity. Now, if the sun is afflicted and you have the Shanna, or the eighth house itself is afflicted, the Lord is afflicted, whatever, however it manifests, or just free will, you've just free willed yourself into a negative manifestation of the eighth house, which is not too difficult because the eighth house is so painful. When that happens, you have somebody who is broken down by the crisis and the trauma and the unexpected events, who can't really face these events that are very easily breaking somebody down, right? And also in the form of sexual bond, they lose their identity. They overly meld with another person, or they're overly dependent on these bonds. They're overly clinging to that other person. They don't know who they are when they're getting sexually bonded with another person. There is, a breaking of the identity and a lack of understanding of who one is in the face of crisis, trauma, unexpected events. And that's, the shadow manifestation, because the sun is weak. The sun is our character. It is our consistent nature. It is the dominant masculine force that is firm and steadfast in the face of any adversity. And the eighth house produces the most difficult, painful, visceral, intense adversity in our life. The eighth house, or if it's empty, you look to the eighth lord to see where that's going to manifest. But the sun has the potential, when healthy, to be solid in the face of that and know who one is and still walk their path of dharma and destiny. But again, the shadow manifestation, someone will crumble in that face of those difficult experiences and unexpected experiences, and deep, because eighth house goes the deepest. Out of all the houses, eighth house goes into the deepest of our emotional body. And that kind of transitions us into the psychological manifestations, where the sun involves, or will be involving, your emotional security and internal transformation. Right? The psychological manifestations. So the light version of that is somebody who is solid in their identity. They know who they are. They're honorable. They're noble. They have, nice solar qualities. Their sun is strong. So they're honorable. They're trustworthy. They're consistent. They're reliable. They're able to take the lead. They're able to become a king in their own right, or become the king of their own kingdom and fulfill their destiny, continuously bettering themselves, making the proper sacrifices. These are all things the sun asks of us. And through that, they have emotional security, because they've taken action, they've taken initiation towards the things they're meant to be doing. And so they feel confident, and they also feel emotionally secure, that I know no matter what happens outside, I'm going to continue being me. I'm going to continue taking the lead. I'm going to take control and manage my kingdom as the king, as the sun. And that's why I feel emotionally secure. And also, they're going through these transformations to become a better king, to become a better leader, to become a better father, or masculine figure, a patriarchal figure, man or woman. We both have these masculine, feminine energies within us, some more than others, right? There are some women that have more solar qualities than lunar qualities, and vice versa. Okay? So it's not inherently just about sex or gender expression. This is an archetypal energy. These are the law of gender based off Hermeticism, masculine and the feminine that we see throughout nature. Right? So you can put your social constructionist books away and and focus on the archetypes and the universal energies that we're talking about here, because we're talking about things from a spiritual perspective, not from a sociological perspective or physical materialistic perspective. The shadow manifestation is, again, somebody who is emotionally insecure, because in the face of crisis and all these things, they flounder, or they lie, or they cheat, or they're fickle, and they don't know who they are, right? And so they feel emotionally insecure because they haven't been able to take initiative and move towards their destiny, take that action they know they're supposed to be taking, and be who they're meant to be, because of whatever reason, whatever the affliction is to the sun. It can be for many different reasons, that somebody doesn't live out their core identity, somebody doesn't manifest in alignment their archetypal representation that's based off of the sun's placement. And also, when it comes to transformations, the transformational experiences break their core identity. They have a complete ego disillusion, or a mental break, or an identity crisis, right? These are things that can happen when the sun is weak in the eighth house. So when the shadow occurs for each planet, it's going to be the most visceral, it's going to be the most painful and destructive, because also the eighth house represents death too. So you're facing death internally and externally. Either it's the death of loved ones or people you care about, the death of ideas, or even your physical body at some points, and also the death of one's internal identity, or the different aspects, the different planets, depending on what the Lord is doing, the sign's doing, and the planets in the eighth house are doing. Now we go to the moon, which is inherently in a vacuum far more difficult. Obviously, if the moon's, say, exalted in Taurus, you're going to have a lot easier time than, say, if it's debilitated in Scorpio. So if you had this configuration, I respect, oh my gosh, this is a very intense life that you have incarnated into. You have some deep, intense, passionate, and visceral experiences that will shake you to your core. Not to, I'm not here to sugarcoat things, right? I want to provide as much honest knowledge as possible, and you do with it what you will, right? But the moon here. So, well, what is the moon? The moon is the queen, the mother, our soft inner child, our emotions, the feminine aspect, the receptive aspect of our consciousness. Again, men have moons. Some men even express their moons more directly, more prominently than women, and vice versa. So again, don't get too caught up on feminine, masculine manifestations. These are universal principles, not sociological concepts. So the moon, it's our receptive nature. And so why does it inherently have trouble, difficulty, more than honestly any other planet? Only one that comes close is Saturn. You'll see why later on when I explain it. But with the moon, it is a receptive part. It's our vulnerable, soft part. It represents the inner child and the nurturing and care we get from the mother when we're most vulnerable. It's about getting our emotional needs met. So you put that in the house of crisis, transformation, trauma, the unexpected events, right? Death, destruction, pain, our deepest fears, our inner demons. These are all things that eighth house represents. You're putting the softest, most vulnerable part of yourself, where you're the part that's supposed to be your comfort zone, and you're placing it into the most painful, visceral, difficult aspect of your entire life, which is the eighth house. So it's essentially like you're throwing a baby to demons. And the light manifestation, though, obviously that's a crazy introduction I just provided to you, but this is what's coming to me as I'm channeling this information for you. At least when the light manifestation is that one, because you have that comfort zone there, one can learn over time to become emotionally resilient and feel comfortable in chaos, can feel comfortable with death, can feel comfortable and more open to the difficult things in life that we can't control, the chronic illnesses and issues that we can't change no matter how hard we want to change them, which is signified by the eighth house. Okay. And also the moon is adaptable. It's the most adaptable planet. And so if a light manifestation, somebody is able to intuitively adapt to the situation and adapt to the different crises and unexpected events and traumatic experiences that one has. And the moon is also the most social planet, meaning connecting with other people to get one's emotional needs met and get the attention that it craves, because the moon is very much a social planet, along with Venus and Mercury. But I would say moon is the most, because it's constantly vying for that attention, to be seen, to be heard. Think about a baby. The baby loves attention. Literally, babies will get sick and can die if they get no attention. That's not the case with humans, but we can go mentally insane if we don't get any human contact for a decade or something. But a baby, the first year of life, for no attention, they can literally die. That's the moon. The moon is that infant, that most vulnerable part of your development. It represents the first year of life, the moon. So with all that said, somebody is also able to connect with other people and gain care from other people, or self-care for themselves, to maneuver these crises and unexpected events. Now, if the moon is afflicted at all, well then, the most vulnerable part is exposed to the most visceral, intense, painful aspects of one's life, a person can experience: death, destruction, ego death, disillusion, trauma, fear, whatever, then it emotional turmoil, an inability to fully connect emotionally with somebody or be sexually intimate with somebody, right? With the sun there, you have somebody who's more consistent and has a strong identity, so they can be emotionally bonding with somebody in that intimate setting. But with the moon, you think about it too, the moon's the innocent infant child, right? And so that you do not want to expose children, infants, to that kind of intimacy. That is for adults, right? But you're exposing that the more innocent parts of yourself are going to be more exposed to the emotional bonding with other people. And so you can really lose your emotional groundedness and comfort, and constantly feeling like whenever you get comfortable, it gets upended by something that you did not expect. When it comes to the psychological manifestations, obviously your emotional security and inner transformation, Well, the moon is supposed to be comfortable. It's not really about transforming or becoming better like the sun or Mars or even Jupiter, which is about transcendence. The moon is more about feeling comfortable and getting your basic needs met as a human being who needs connection and who needs love and who needs to take care of oneself. And so I'm starting off with the shadow manifestation, but so if it's afflicted, somebody can feel very emotionally hurt by these events, more sensitive to these things than the average person. And we'll find that there is a lot more events that upend their emotional security. And so they need to move towards the more light manifestation. So what happens when it's more positively manifest? Somebody's able to take care of themselves. Somebody's able to nurture themselves. They're able to attract and magnetize the right people into their life that take care of themselves and treat them properly, right? With the moon in the eighth afflicted, you can have somebody who attracts abusive or negative relationships that reignite or re-trigger the separation trauma that we have when we're younger, or some of the intense trauma that can happen after, depending on the person, right? Or the loss, or the unhealthy attachment styles, things like that. The moon is very important for emotional attachment styles involving psychological studies, if you've heard of that, in regards to relationships. So, and the moon's like the most important relationship planet. Also, somebody can be very terrified of relationships and connecting with somebody deeply because they feel like they're going to lose themselves. And so they feel emotionally insecure in relationships. They feel emotionally insecure surrounded with other people or interacting with other people. Like they're not going to get their needs met from the people around them. People cannot face their inner demons to transform or face the difficult trauma that will lead to that ego death, that will lead to that transformation to become a better version of themselves, which are things that the eighth house represents. But when the moon is healthy, and you're using it consciously or you're healing it, then you can magnetize the right people, take care of yourself, find emotional security through self-care, through social connections, through nurturing, and through caring for other people as well. Because again, the moon is also the mother. So caring for other people, caring for other children especially, is one way to heal your own inner child. Having kids is a powerful way to do inner child work, believe it or not, because our children, along with our partner's inner child, so choose wisely, along with our partner's inner child, is a physical manifestation of our inner children with their own karma mixed in. But your children are given to you for a reason because they align with your karmic makeup, you and your partners and your ancestral karmic makeup. So they manifest, and so they are a representation of that. And so by healing them or by caring for them, nurturing them, you are nurturing yourself, and vice versa. The more you nurture yourself, care for yourself, the better you can nurture and care for other people and other people's inner children, even if they're adults. So that was a lot. I mean, the moon in the eighth house is a lot. This is probably going to be a really long video just because the eighth house in general is just, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to unpack, especially psychologically, which is usually what I focus on in regards to astrology in my practice with my clients. So we have Mars in the eighth house. Not inherently the worst thing in the world. Obviously, you need to look at the aspects, the eighth lord, planets in the eighth, the dignity of Mars, and even in Varga charts too, divisional charts when using Vedic astrology. But Mars in a vacuum is not the, Sun and Mars probably fare the best in general. Maybe Jupiter can do decently. No, actually Mars and Sun. I'm going to just stick with Mars and Sun. Yeah, Mars and Sun are probably the best. So from a physical standpoint, you can also have, even though I just kind of said that. So we'll start with the light manifestation. When it comes to the light manifestation, you have somebody who can use you're taking the warrior, you're taking the general, you're taking the pioneer, the will, and you're putting it into the house of crisis, unexpected events. Also eighth house represents battles and fights, but, fights that are life or death or very intense fights, battles, conflicts, and emotional intimacy. So there can be a lot of passion, a lot of fire, a lot of hunger in these areas of life that can be very intense. But because you have a very powerful, strong, directed warrior energy archetype in that area, the warrior, if anyone, right, the warrior or the king is going to be able to best manage the crisis. You have the general, right? The general's facing death all day. General's facing battles all day, facing unexpected events all day on the battlefield. And so Mars is naturally better equipped than, say, like the child, mother, soft nurturing moon. The Mars is more, let's get it done. Because wherever Mars is, that's your will, that's your fighting spirit, that's where you're going to have the problems you need to overcome. And so Mars is going to be more used to dealing with these problems. Now, the eighth house is also chronic illnesses or death or things that, problems that you can't actually solve through your will, through your effort, which is what Mars represents. But at least with Mars, you can have the willpower, the strength of character, and you can train yourself and discipline your mind and your body, which are Mars qualities. You can discipline yourself to withstand and face head on these painful feelings, these painful emotions, these painful experiences, this trauma, and come out the other side stronger when Mars is in good dignity. When Mars is more difficult, we do the shadow manifestation. Well, you have somebody who might be more weak-willed, might be more passive, or might be more impulsive. And so their impulsivity, their brashness, their harshness, their cruelty, the way that they speak or the way that they move, because Mars is a very quick moving planet, can actually lead to these unexpected events, these crises, these negative things going on, right? And then when in regards to the opposite end, someone's too passive, somebody doesn't have the weak will or has a weak will, somebody doesn't have that strength of character that Mars can give because of an affliction, because Mars is weak. Well, then you have somebody who, in the face of these crises, these events, they feel neutered. They don't feel like they have the strength to exert themselves and to push themselves to at least face the difficulties head on. They just run away from it and they avoid it, and it goes into the subconscious mind, the shadow, the most painful part of the subconscious mind, which is what the eighth house represents, the shadow itself. And it doesn't get dealt with, and then it repeats and manifests in the external world as unexpected events, crisis, death, transformational events that are meant to bring our awareness to the internal things that have gone unnoticed inside of ourselves. Now, eighth house is all about shadow work. And if you've done any digging on my page, earlier videos, earlier courses, shadow work is very important to me. I think it's a very central aspect of being human beings, but most humans don't know about it. So if you want to know about shadow work, check out my earlier videos. Now we go to the psychological manifestations. So when it comes to the psychology, you have emotional security and transformation. So you gain emotional security through Mars things, through taking action, through battling other people, overcoming your enemies, overcoming your obstacles, fixing problems, having a warrior spirit, training the mind, training the body, cultivating discipline, but disciplined effort. Mars is more, lifting weights or like training like an athlete, training like a fighter, like a boxer or like a warrior. That's Mars training. Saturn discipline is just not doing things. Mars is like the willpower. Saturn's more the won't power. It's the staying on the right path and ignoring anything that doesn't serve your destiny. Where Mars is about self-improvement and developing one's muscles and abilities and strength to walk on that path better. So both represent discipline, but in different ways. Saturn's more passive, hands-off. Saturn's more action-oriented, hands-on. More of a masculine, directive planet. And you gain emotional security from that. And you transform into a better version of yourself through these experiences, through developing the will, and through facing these traumatic inner demons and experiences head on. If Mars is afflicted, you have the shadow manifestation, then you have somebody who, because of their weak will, because they're not willing to face their demons, because they're not willing to acknowledge or face the unexpected events in their lives, they kind of ignore it or act like it doesn't exist. And that problem festers and gets worse and worse, or manifests more unexpected events, more traumatic events, more things. They're not able to, have the courage, Mars, to emotionally bond with somebody deeply because they're too scared. Well, then somebody's emotionally insecure. They feel like if things happen on the outside that are unexpected, or they can't control everything in the external world, they're not going to be okay. And so they have this constant fear. There's this insecurity. They need to control everything, right? They might be, impulsive, or they might have a hot temper because they're constantly not feeling safe, right? Underneath all anger is fear. And so there's gonna be a lot of fear. Mars there, it's gonna manifest a lot as anger to protect oneself from the inner demons. But you're gonna see and project those inner demons on the outside. Something to be mindful of. So that's Mars. Now we do Mercury. Mercury, which is the scientist, the observer, the detective, the intellectual mind. Mercury. So we start with the physical manifestation. So when it's manifesting in a more light fashion, you have Mars in better dignity, you have Mercury in better dignity, you have Mercury in better shape. Somebody approaches the unexpected events, somebody approaches the trauma or the crisis and sexual intimacy with their intellect. So they might plan ahead to avoid these things, or they might strategize the best ways to approach these things. They might be more organized so these things don't happen. And when these things do happen, they're able to dissect it and figure out what's going on and intellectually understand something. I mean, that's literally what talk therapy is. Mercury in the eighth house will do very well with talk therapy, because Mercury is about communication, Mercury is about talking. And so if you have a good Mercury in the 8th house, then somebody can benefit a lot from talk therapy in regards to their trauma, in regards to the unexpected events or the crises they've had to face in their life, or even involving emotional intimacy or the breaks they had. Bad breakups can be signified by the 8th house. My ex had Mercury in the 8th, and she was experiencing and catastrophizing certain things and wasn't willing to go to talk therapy because she has Saturn with it, afflicting it. And so that held her back from actually, from her perspective, she didn't really believe in therapy. And I don't think therapy is for everybody. I think it is dependent on that person. Ironically enough, though, for her, it would have done a lot of good. But because Saturn was starving and suppressing Mercury's natural inclinations, she didn't want to get help and she didn't want to process it. She didn't want to talk through it, even though she would talk through it with me or her friends or constantly be talking about it, right? And that's kind of the more negative manifestation. The shadow manifestation of Mercury is somebody who's constantly ruminating about the negative events that happened in the past or could happen in the future. Somebody goes through a lot of traumatic experiences because they're not planning properly, or because they're not thinking ahead, or because they're disorganized, or they're not using their intellect to strategize to avoid certain pitfalls or problems. They just go at life not really thinking things through, communicating in ways where they're not thinking things through, and then it leads to crisis, unexpected events, breakups, breaks, you name it. And also, the biggest thing, which is what I experienced a lot with my ex, is the rumination, thinking about the catastrophes that could happen and being very scared of making mistakes. Because again, Mercury is about trial and error. It's the scientist, it's the observer, it's the detective. Being a scientist, being a detective is all about being willing to fail. You're going to cross off more failures. You're going to take more L's than you're going to get W's. That's the entire point. The detective doesn't get the suspect or the murder on the first try. He has to go through all the suspects. A scientist doesn't fulfill their hypothesis on the first experiment. He's got to do, or she, they got to do a lot of different experiments, right? Mercury is all about failure, and you learn through experiential failure. And then once you get a win, you focus on it and you analyze why you got that win, so then you can replicate it in the future. These are all Mercury qualities. You got Mercury in the 8th house. Well, there can be a deep fear around failure, about using your Mercury in a healthy way. And so you think, oh, I can't make mistakes. I can't try things unless I know for a fact that it's going to work out. I know for a fact that I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to take an L, because in your mind, subconsciously, you're thinking, because it will lead to the deepest, most painful trauma, fear, things involving bad things, right? Or I can't be emotionally vulnerable because what happens if I go through a breakup with this person, or if they hurt me or they betray me. 8th house. Another thing, betrayal is an 8th house concept. So someone can get betrayed a lot. Sun, betrayal is part of your destiny, right? So things like that. When it comes to the psychological manifestations, emotional security and transformation, well, someone feels emotionally secure with Mercury healthy going on there, light manifestation. Why? Because they're able to strategize, because they're organized, because they think things through, because they have the skills and abilities to maneuver life, or they're able to learn the skills and abilities. They have that Mercury to learn new things, gain new information, gain information on why these unexpected events happen, why this trauma happened, how to dissect and work with this trauma, communicate with other people. Just in general, talking things through, they feel emotionally secure because they know I can talk with other people, I can learn from other people, I can exchange, I can develop my skills, I can take the practical steps, and I can avoid, using my intellect, these problems again in the future, so I'm going to be okay emotionally. And also when it comes to transformation, they're able to dissect it, understand what's happening in a more intellectual way. And so their mind is more balanced. And so they have a strong intellect, a very powerful intellect. They also have a lot of depth, right? So, I'm talking about also how painful the 8th house is, and it is. And on its face, you think, well, then why, it seems unfair that I would have planets in the 8th house, or, I know people have planets in the 8th house, and what do they ever do? And who knows? I don't know their past life karma. I'm not going to speak for that. But one thing that the 8th house definitely does is it gives you depth. You ever meet somebody who doesn't go through anything, somebody who might be spoiled or lived a lavish or pampered life, and then you meet them and there's not really a lot of depth to them. It's very surface, it's very focused on the material comforts, on their body, on the ego things. When someone's been through crisis, been through trauma, and been able to use their planets in a healthy way and maneuver it and face it head on, you have a lot of wisdom, you have a lot of understanding about the difficulties of life. Through the darkness, you can see the light. And you can only know the light once you've seen the darkest. And a concept that Carl Jung talks about is that a tree can only grow as high as deep as the roots are going. So the deeper you can go down into the depths of your shadow, your inner demons, the more light that you can manifest, and the bigger you can, the more magnetic you can be, because eighth house is also about being magnetic sexually, but also just energetically. And so when you've been through things, you've faced things, you've seen things, and you've come out the other side stronger, you can magnetize people and have a power and depth to you that cannot be fabricated and that cannot be replicated without true life experience. So when Mercury is doing well in the eighth house, one can do that. Now, if it's afflicted, then somebody's overthinking the crises. They feel emotionally insecure because they feel like they can't manage things when it comes. They feel like they don't have the skills, the abilities. They don't feel like they're going to find the right information. They feel like talking things through was not going to do anything, kind of what I mentioned before with my ex. So an afflicted Mercury in eighth house can be very difficult, especially from an intellectual standpoint. Somebody who catastrophizes things doesn't feel like they're going to be able to emotionally bond with other people, because if something goes wrong, if there's a break, it's going to be too painful, and they want to avoid that pain. Like, there's a lot of fear. So that's the shadow manifestation of Mercury. And now we go to Venus, the diplomat, the partner, the pleaser, the relating aspects of one's consciousness. So when you have Venus in the eighth house, the light manifestation, somebody who can gracefully maneuver unexpected events, difficulties, crisis, trauma, and sexual intimacy, can have a diplomatic approach, meaning that, despite the fact that they might go through things or traumatic things, they're still able to harmonize with other people. They're still able to get the things that they need from other people by having a strong sense or good sense of self-worth. They value themselves. And so they believe that they have things of value that they can trade with other people to manage. An example would be, because this might sound a little abstract, an example would be like somebody breaks their leg, but they're a lawyer. And so they know, even though this operation is going to be $10,000 after insurance, I'm a lawyer. I make a lot of money. I can pay this off because I can provide the lawyer services once I heal up. Or, Venus is also relationships. So partners in one's life, romantic partners or relationships in general, can be close friends, also involves Venus, or where you're exchanging on equal footing with somebody. So equal partnerships, equal exchanges with other people, friends, family, but more particularly relationships, can help you maneuver these crises, these trauma, these insecurities, and also obviously maneuver sexual intimacy. If Venus is afflicted, well, then somebody might not be able to manage these difficult moments. There might be an overdependence on the relationships or exchanging with other people, and not being able to be more individualistic in the sense of like a Sun or a Mars who will find that courage, that strength within themselves. They might look to other people to do that for them. Moon also can have that problem as well, which I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about the moon. It can also create a vapidness or a vainness or a trivialness, meaning that the reason why they might face crises or they might face trauma or things that are related to vanity, one's looks, needing things to be harmonious. And so whenever there's this harmony, it can lead to intense emotional reactions, and it can be traumatic for these people. And so they lead to people pleasing because they're so terrified of something unexpected happening, something going wrong, and they feel like if those things happen, they can't handle it themselves. And so they people please, or they cling to relationships, or they're constantly having to exchange with other people, and they're dependent on it. They're finding themselves consistently in codependent relationships, usually as the people pleasing partner in the relationship. Or if Venus is negatively afflicted, more of like with a cruel planet or North Node Rahu, then you can have somebody who is more of the narcissistic manifestation of the relationship, less of a people pleaser. Sun with Venus can also do that as well. Sun can cause some problems. Now, the psychological manifestations, somebody feels emotionally secure because they are beautiful or graceful, or they have wonderful Venusian qualities. They're diplomatic. They're a good partner. They can please other people. They're pleasing to other people. They can stimulate other people's senses. They can stimulate their own senses. They can, find the luxuries in life. They have lots of luxuries and nice things around themselves, right? They find emotional security in those things. And so if you have Venus healthy, somebody's able to attract those things. They're able to exchange with other people and get what they need from other people in the external world that involves Venus. They value themselves, and so they feel emotionally secure because they know that I have something of value to give to other people. That means I can get what I need from other people. I can always trade for what I need. Okay? Venus or moon is like I can attract naturally. People just want to give things to me. Mars is I can take action and fight and overcome and train and gain strength. Mercury is I can use my intellect, plan, strategize to, get the things that I need. And Sun is I'm just a good person. I know who I am. I'm on my path. I'm destined to get the things. I'm the king. I'm destined to get the things that I need. And so I feel emotionally secure. Things like that. But with emotional security involving Venus, it's about your grace, diplomacy. And on its face, to just keep it simple, it's about external things, and in particular, other people, and being able to woo other people gracefully. But if Venus is afflicted, well, then somebody becomes overly reliant on the luxuries in their life, overly reliant on their relationships to gain emotional security. They might have or attract toxic relationships, toxic people that don't exchange with them in a fair way. And so either they're taking advantage of other people or they're being taken advantage of, and that leads to emotional turmoil, emotional insecurity, and a lack of stability in one's internal space. They don't make good deals. And that leads to bad things, negative things, destructive things, shadow things. And when it comes to transformation, a person is unable to go do the hard work because when it comes to transformation, you can't really rely on another person. You got to do it yourself. And Venus is all about relationships. And so, when somebody's alone, facing their inner demons alone, it's difficult for them. And it can be very painful because they want harmony. They want pleasing things. They want to be comforted and sensually stimulated in positive ways. And a lot of the eighth house concepts are the opposite of that. And it's about destroying the ego and breaking you down to your lowest point to crack you open to grow something even more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. These are things that the eighth house can bring us. Through crisis, the most beautiful, incredible benefits to yourself and humanity can manifest. Or at the very least, through your crisis, through your transformation, you're able to help and guide other people. Because I know I can. Because of that. Because of my trauma. Because of my bullshit, That's why I even got into shadow work in the first place. You think if your life's going great, you're going to learn about this stuff? You're going to learn astrology? You're going to be here watching this video? No. You're going to be too busy on your yacht. You're going to be doing other things, You're not going to be worrying about inner healing and health and spirituality and consciousness. It comes through that pain that the eighth house can bring. Okay? Now we have Jupiter. You have guru, the priest, the philosopher, the guide in the eighth house. Wherever Jupiter is, it expands things. It brings abundance. It also brings fortune and wisdom, naturally speaking. It's a fortunate house. So this can soften the eighth house. Can also roughen up Jupiter, which is supposed to be naturally beneficial and positive and joyful, depending on the dignity and aspects and things of that nature. But naturally, it's supposed to be more lighter and expansive. And so in the eighth house, it's involving more intense, deep, destructive, and traumatic things. So when you have Jupiter there in the light manifestation, you have somebody who has a lot of abundance, a lot of wisdom, a lot of, let's say, creativity to maneuver the crisis, the unexpected events in one's life, the traumas and the emotional bonds and intimacy you make with other people. You also have somebody who might have good gurus or priests or philosophies or spiritual pursuits that help somebody transcend these traumatic events and crisis and unexpected events, right? What works better not to fall victim to feeling torn in the tide if you can just either go up or go down. If you can get a helicopter and fly above the waves that are crashing onto you, or sink deep beneath the waves through spiritual oneness and depth. It's a moksha house. It's about depth. It's a hidden house. So Jupiter there, like I said, can bring higher order concepts, transcendent concepts that put things in perspective. These unexpected events, these traumatic events, the emotional bonds you make with other people, you'll be fine because you can see the bigger picture. You can see how it's all playing a part. Everything has a purpose. You have a lot of meaning and purpose attached to these very painful events and aspects of life. You can find the meaning. You can forgive yourself and the people that may have facilitated or caused or led to those very painful events that the eighth house represents, or that trauma. Jupiter is afflicted or it's weak, well, then there's not a lot of room for forgiveness. You don't really see a purpose to it. You can't really find a higher perspective. You can't really see the bigger picture. You're just kind of lost in the sauce. You feel unlucky. You don't feel like you have enough abundance. You don't have enough extra stuff to guide you through these turbulent times. You feel like you don't have a proper guru, priest, philosophy, spiritual creed, religion to move you through. And that can be difficult. You feel like you're lost and you don't have guidance in these moments of crisis, where if Jupiter's doing well, you feel like you know you have your goal, you know where you're going, and even though things are going bad right now, you're headed in the right direction, and so you're going to get through it because you have a bigger perspective. Psychologically speaking, you feel emotionally secure and you're able to go through transformations. Why? Because you can operate from a higher perspective. You have proper gurus and guides and teachers and counsel to move you through all things that Jupiter represents. You have, like I said, abundance, a lot of wealth, money. Jupiter's money. Venus, nope. Venus is luxuries, or the things you buy with extra money or lots of money. Sensual, stimulating pleasures, nice foods, nice clothes, nice aesthetics. Venus is aesthetics. Where Jupiter is the money you actually use, the wealth you use. And so if you have an extra abundance of wealth, well, it's a lot easier to, manage chronic illness, or manage losing your home, or manage a breakup, even if you have money to go on vacation, buy a new house, pay for your medical bills, pay for lawyer fees if you go through a divorce, which can be signified by the eighth house, breakups, intense things like that. Even the loss of loved ones, or you can get away, or you can take time off of work. Like, all these things are facilitated or supported by money, fortunately or unfortunately enough, depending on who you are. If you don't have money, then you have the ability to see the bigger perspective, find purpose in it. And so you have emotional security in that no matter what happens, I will know why it happened. I'll have understanding and I'll learn from it and I'll gain a deeper wisdom from it. Jupiter in the eighth house. I think I did the, well, yeah, I mean, obviously Jupiter too, if it's the opposite, the shadow manifestation will be, someone doesn't have any purpose in life. They don't feel like anything really matters. They don't have the proper guidance. And so they feel emotionally insecure. They're more reactive to the things that happen in their life that destabilize their material security, which is signified by the second house, the polar opposite. And so when those things happen, when their material security and their body are threatened, they can't see a higher perspective. And so they feel emotionally insecure. They feel that emotional volatility. And that is Jupiter in the eighth. And now finally, as we conclude, we have Saturn in the eighth house. So this is the second most difficult planet in a vacuum. Obviously, if Saturn's exalted, then that can help out with some stuff, but it's tough. I had a client with Saturn in the eighth house, and there is a lot of deep fears, a lot of insecurities. Or even, I also said my ex too, she also had Saturn in the eighth, and so it can create a lot of fear because Saturn is the servant, the elderly, the, let's say, authoritarian authority figures, shadow. It represents a shadow. So you have the shadow planet in the shadow house. You have the planet of our doubts, our fears, our insecurities, our trauma in the house of fears, doubts, insecurities, and deepest traumas. So you have like a double whammy. And unfortunately, in this case, two negatives do not create a positive. Two negatives just create a deeper tear and more lessons to learn, more to learn and understand about oneself, more strength that can be gained and gleaned from these experiences, but also it involves a lot of strength, internal strength, emotional strength. So when it comes to a physical manifestation, so if we do the light manifestation, well, Saturn does restrict things, so it can, unexpected events, trauma crisis can unfold slower because Saturn is a slower moving planet. Mars and the moon and Mercury will produce a lot more rapid, fast, but usually less deep sudden events and crises. Where Saturn, they're going to unfold slowly, but they can be really severe. I mean, Saturn here can involve a lot of death. Like the client I mentioned, a lot of reason, and usually too, eighth house is not producing fears, doubts, insecurities, trauma from nothing. I mean, it's rooted in reality, whether it's in generational trauma or personal trauma you've experienced, or indirect trauma you've observed, right? Or even done. I'm not going to call you out like that, but people performing evil acts or doing heinous things can produce trauma in that person. We all have an inner child, whether you're a perpetrator or a victim. So nobody is saved from trauma in these severe events. So with Saturn there, a lot of death. I mean, Saturn represents death and decay. I mean, there can be a lot of death in one's life, right? Or dealing with watching people you care about decay and die slowly because Saturn involves that. So I guess we're focusing on the shadow manifestation early on, but yeah, I mean, it can lead restrictions. So there's less of them, but they usually go deeper. Somebody can have a lot of a resilience though, ability to take a lot of punishment. With Saturn, I always use the example of Rocky, or somebody who can take a lot of beatings, or like Wolverine, who can take a lot of punishment and pain but keep coming back stronger and better, or just hang in there. They have that grit, they have that resolve, they just are able to persevere. That's Saturn. Saturn's able to hang in there despite the punishment. So you have somebody who can go through the unexpected events, the traumas. They can bond with somebody emotionally because they know that they can hang in there. They have more of that staying power and can take beatings from life and from the people around them. They're more patient as well. They have a patience to them, and there's also a realistic approach to life and these unexpected events. Meaning, let's put it this way: Saturn in the eighth, there's a lot less of the denial stage going on. Like with Moon or Venus, Venus will probably have more. Someone's more prone to denial, to no, that they didn't die, or that thing didn't happen, or I didn't go through that trauma, that wasn't that traumatic. Like there's a lot more self-denial because doesn't really want to face that fear. Now that can happen too out of fear with Saturn, but Saturn's a realistic planet, and so there can be an acknowledgement of it, of like, that's life. And there might not be a true emotional understanding or integration of that traumatic experience. You can acknowledge that it's traumatic, but there might be a distance that's produced because it can be so deep. And so someone might wave it off as saying, well, that's life. People go through accidents, people lose people, people get, hurt by other people. We don't have to go too deep into it, but I think you get the point, especially when it involves sexual intimacy in the eighth house. So people go through things, that's just part of life. And so there might be less of an acceptance in that sense, but they are able to face and acknowledge that that thing happened. They just might take a more cold, stoic, detached approach to it because that's what Saturn represents. If you go over more to the shadow side, like I just said, the fears are deep, the traumas can be intense, they might be slow unfolding, but they really get down to the core essence of somebody. They are, again, like I said, involve a lot of death and decay, and can also lead to illness because Saturn can involve illness, or chronic issues of something. I have another client who has Saturn in the eighth house. They deal with chronic migraines. So it can manifest in many different ways, but Saturn usually is going to be associated with some kind of chronic ailment or affliction that continuously comes back again and again. But if Saturn's in good shape, it'll most likely manifest less or be less devastating. The more difficult Saturn is, usually the more difficult these illnesses can be, or people in one's life that you care about, that you have an emotional bond with, will go through those chronic illnesses if Saturn's there and afflicted and not doing the best. Psychologically speaking, Saturn, so someone can have emotional security through their patience because they know that they can hang in there, because they have the grit, because they have the discipline, they work hard, right? Another thing that I forgot to mention when it comes to crisis, unexpected events, traumatic events, intimacy, there is an ability to work hard and do the things day in and day out, disciplined every day, consistently, that will lead to maneuvering those things in a more efficient or healthy way. Same thing with emotional security. I work hard, I'm patient, I have the grit, I have the strength and resilience to forego anything. And also Saturn too is about avoiding the things that are not for you. Sun is about focusing and moving on the path that's for you, along with Jupiter, your dharma, your destiny. Those are dharmic planets in the sense, they're fire planets. So Sun and Jupiter are about being on your path. Saturn's about not going off your path, not being distracted. And so someone can feel emotional security because they're able to focus on the things that really matter in their life. They have a minimalistic lifestyle. They don't have too many distractions. They're not bogged down by excess and overabundance, which is something that also Jupiter can manifest as well and make it more difficult. If you have something in the eighth house, is that you have crisis or events, negative events manifesting for Jupiter in a negative sense because you have too much going on in your life, or you're taking on too much. Or Saturn, usually somebody also is able to manage their time better and maneuver things better because they're more efficient and they're minimalistic. They're not taking on too much, not biting off more than they can chew. That's if Saturn is healthy. If Saturn is unhealthy, it's afflicted. Say it's like an Aries, it's debilitated, or with Mars, it's enemy, with the Sun or the Moon, planets it's enemies with, and it's afflicted, or with North Node Rahu or Ketu. You have somebody who might not be able to manage their time well, might feel like there's never enough time. They might feel like they don't have the resilience and the inner strength and the grit to really hang in there and deal with the crisis and unexpected events that happen in life. They feel emotionally insecure because in the face of adversity, in the face of life's greatest challenges, eighth house, they crumble and they fall victim to fear. And there's a deep fear, a deep self-doubt, a deep insecurity and a deep sensitivity to things that involve the eighth house. And so they can't go through that transformation. They can't face their shadow because their shadow, from their perspective, is so ominous. It's so deep. It's so visceral. Now, that's pretty doom and gloom. Obviously, it doesn't always manifest. I'm kind of going at the extremes here. Usually, it manifests somewhere in the middle, right? Everyone's got a different mixture of light, shadow, positive, negative, light, dark. But the thing that needs to be understood in regards to the eighth house, again, is it's all about transforming you into a better version of yourself, letting go of what no longer serves you, taking out of the things that you've been attached to that are not serving your destiny and your path, and adding that depth and understanding that only the most painful events in life can provide. And if you enjoyed that video, I appreciate you for watching. Let me know down in the comments if anything resonated, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them down below. I love talking to you guys and interacting with you all. And in the next video, we'll be doing the ninth house as we continue this series all throughout the houses. So subscribe if you want to keep learning through these free courses, these 3 informations. I'm going in order, each house, and making all these courses for you to access the occult knowledge that I found so powerful for me and my clients. And I'm sure it'll help you as well. Thank you.